Hi, everyone. Welcome to So What, the Marketing Analytics and Insights live show. I'm Katie, joined by Chris and John. We are now in that weird in between time of the last couple of months of the year where Thanksgiving has happened, Christmas has not yet happened, or any other real major religious holidays. And everyone is just sort of like, all right, let's just get through this. And so, with that, John and I were talking the other day about, well, does every industry sort of follow the same kind of holiday predictive, like holiday seasonality? And the answer, I guess we're going to find out today. So, what we wanted to chat about was that holiday predictive forecast. And so, what holidays, how the holidays look different for different industries, where to source predictive forecasting data from. And Chris, you're certainly going to touch on that. And then what actions to take. So, Chris, where do you want to start today as we're talking about predictive forecasts?
I guess one of the more important things to start with would be to understand what the purpose of the forecast is. So, Katie, when you put together user stories, what would you say would be an appropriate user story for, say, a cheese shop? Let's go with that to start. You know, what a predictive forecast for a cheese shop? What would their user story be?
So, as the manager of a cheese shop, I want to understand what cheese people are looking for on any given week so that I know what to be promoting on social media, have recipes for. Um, and then a second one might be, as the cheese shop manager, I want to know what cheeses are people not looking for so I know what to put on sale and clearance
All
and
right,
put
I think
on
that's
manager special.
manager special. Yeah, this cheese is blue when it's not supposed to be.
Fun fact, manager special does mean that things are pretty much out of code. So buyer beware.
Avoid the manager special.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
It's like saying always wash your cans before you open them. Okay, so with those stories, I think that's a great place to start, because one of the things that you want to do is you want to use the various different tools that are available to marketers to see, like, what kinds of trend data could we get if we were to go out and get said data. So let's look. Let's go to our two of our friends, right? Let's go to friend number one is going to be Google Trends, right? Which is arguably one of the most useful pieces of software that is still available for free. And what this does, for folks who are unfamiliar, is you simply type in search terms, and you can see the historical data going as far back as Google knows for terms. So let's go ahead and start with mozzarella, right? Because that's a cheese. And we're in the United States, which you can change the location. We're the past 12 months. Look at the last 5 years. That way we can see, are there any kinds of ebbs and flows in this? And so if you're a cheese shop manager, certainly just being able to look backwards and see what kind of things kind of happened here. And you can see there are definitely some, a kind of a heartbeat cycle, like a sine wave within the data. So there is something of a trend here. So this would be one of the tools that you'd want to get started with, just to try and understand, like, what can we even predict a trend, right? Because predictive analytics doesn't work with things that are unpredictable. It seems kind of obvious, but people forget that part. It's like everyone's trying to predict the 2024 presidential election. You can't predict something that hasn't happened. So
Right. And looking at historical events, it's not a one-to-one match. So you're not looking at the right kinds of predictive metrics, because it needs to be something that is consistent and reliable. And, for a lot of reasons, presidential elections are not those. And they're different every time. Different people, different, circumstances, different variables. So I think that that's a really good pro tip to keep repeating.
Exactly. So that's part one. Part two is using the SEO tool of your choice. We use Ahrefs, but pretty much any tool that's got keyword stuff in it can do this. Put in all of your search terms and just get a sense of, this data is the last 30 days. Most tools default to the last 30 days. And you can see the number of searches. By the way, John, I don't know if you hit mute or not, but that did not mute.
I was just going to say the same thing.
Oh yeah, that's bizarre.
But you can see the volume of all the different cheeses. So in the last 30 days, we see here Oaxaca cheese, cotija cheese, mascarpone, cottage cheese, cream cheese, and so on and so forth. Lots and lots of all of these different cheeses, and we see the number of searches. So people search for cream cheese 94,000 times in the last 30 days. They searched for Gruyere 91,000 times in the last 30 days. They searched for Parmesan cheese. So again, Katie, if you were the cheese shop manager, this would at least give you a starting point. The challenge is this is all data that looks backwards, right? The last 30 days, which, as everyone knows, tastes change. Circumstances change. We're about to go into the winter holiday season, and there are probably cheeses that you would serve at Christmas that you wouldn't necessarily serve other times of the year. Like there's always that one that comes in the sausage and cheese basket that looks like a spreadable cheddar cheese, but then it's got like nuts and stuff on the outside. It's like a cheese log roll, shrink wrapped thing.
Cheese ball, yeah.
Yeah, cheese balls. Hillshire Farms and stuff sells those things, and I mean, again, that's not stuff that you're ever going to serve outside of the holiday season. But when when someone gives you the Hillshire Farms box, the Harry and David box, you're like, oh, there's the cheese ball with stuff on the outside.
Thank you very little.
So all that says is we want to be able to look forwards, not necessarily backwards, because circumstances can change, particularly when you're dealing with consumers. With B2B, things are a little more cyclical because of things like stock markets and quarterly reports and how budgets work and things like that. Things are a little bit less volatile. Okay, so those would be the first two data sources I would start with. The challenge here now is we have to kind of glue these things together and then build forecasts from that. The way we do that is with a type of software, predictive analytics software, using an algorithm called Profit with XGBoost. This is time series forecasting software released for free as open source software from Facebook, of all companies, and then modified by the developer community to add error correction that Facebook, for whatever reason, didn't include in their software.
Well, it's funny. I remember, gosh, it must have been 6-7 years ago now when you rolled this out to our then marketing team. And I remember my first thought was, this is a Facebook thing. And I think everyone on the team was also sort of confused of like, what does Facebook have to do with this? And so knowing that the developer community has taken this open source code and modified it to be more accurate is super helpful.
Yep. Facebook uses this a lot for their advertising. And the reason why it is valuable is the methods they chose incorporate a lot of seasonality, but they incorporate a lot of weighting towards more recent trends. Obviously, if you are selling advertising space in an app, you want to give more preference and weight to forecasts based on recent data than legacy data, because again, things change, people change. If you think of a service like Instagram, there may be a new hashtag or a new challenge or a new trend that appears overnight, and you don't want to be trying to forecast and do advertising bid pricing on trends from even 7 days ago, because you want to take advantage of this new trend, like eating Tide Pods. So the catch with software like this is, as you can see, it's available in a couple different programming languages, R and Python. If you don't code in either of those languages, there's not really a way to use the software. So there are products that do this out of the box. IBM Watson is an example, but those obviously do come with a bit of a price tag.
Well, I would think too, they're also harder to customize for, what you need, or just more difficult to understand how the algorithm is actually working versus building it yourself.
Yes. And one of the things that not enough tools do and we actually had to write this ourselves in our own software, is to say, do a statistical check to see if there's a trend before you write a forecast for it, right? Because we don't want to try and forecast something that doesn't exist. So let's do a forecast for Be Real, right? The app. You can see over the last 5 years that basically there's some mistakes, some typos, but it wasn't until really March of this year that this app really took off, and then they got the Saturday Night Live placement and all that stuff. There's not a trend here, right? We see a shape that sort of looks a little bit like a bell curve, but from a statistical perspective, there is no cyclicality. There is no seasonality. So this cannot be forecasted because it's sort of a once in a lifetime thing. Really good example. Clubhouse.
I was going to say, wasn't there that thing? I think I was going to call it Chat House, which is definitely not what it is.
Right. It definitely is not what it is. And what you see is pretty clearly, there was sort of that big spike. It sort of came and went. Not a trend.
Nope.
By definition, which means that you cannot forecast from it. However, things like mozzarella cheese or Parmesan cheese, these are things that absolutely do have seasonality and cyclicality. Let's remove. So you can see, even with Parmesan cheese, if I remove the mozzarella here, there is sort of that heartbeat rhythm. So your next step would be to feed this into predictive analytics software and get a forecast of some kind, get an output. And so we're talking about, let's start with the cheese one, since we're talking about different industries. Let's go clear this. And switch to our cheese database. There you go, cheese. Going to put it in our dates, our terms, our numbers, and let's take a look just at 2023. And let's turn this into a line chart. Make term our color and bring this out.
Oof.
And so we get, well, for each of these cheeses now, we can look at these cheeses either in bulk or or individually. You saw the in bulk with the chart looked like spaghetti, and understand, okay, here's when in the next year American cheese is likely to peak, right? Right around July, second peak around November, another peak December, and then a peak in early January. So you have these ebbs and flows in American cheese. You could take Havarti. Let's go to Havarti. Havarti, a bit different, Thanksgiving and Christmas, but you don't have that summertime bump, right? It's not as popular a cheese. If we look at mozzarella cheese, you get a decent summertime bump. Why? Of course, people are cooking in their pizza ovens that they have outdoor.
Well, it's also mozzarella goes really well, and it's the mozzarella, tomato, and basil
caprese
salad.
Summer.
This caprese summer salad. Thank you.
Exactly.
So, it's interesting because, you're doing the whole United States, which is a really great place to start, especially if you have like an online business. And so I would say that, if you are like a brick and mortar store, drilling down into just your state is also going to be really helpful, which you can do through Google Trends, because the trends that you see for the entire United States might be different than the trends you see for just your state. So, when you're talking about things like food and like the seasons and seasonality, the way in which the weather happens in your state is going to impact that. So in Massachusetts, in July and August, the humidity is off the charts, and people don't want to turn on their ovens and, sort of sit inside with like this hot food. So they're likely to eat more of the caprese salads and other things that are easy to prepare outside. And so you might see that trend different from, Alaska, for example, which is in the United States, but the weather is different at that same period of time.
Exactly. So that's if you were a sort of a cheese person. If you were in the architecture industry, architecture,
Mhm.
engineering, and construction, again, very similar. Let's go ahead and take our term and turn it into a series of pages here. So people search for architects at very different times of the year, right? So people search for architects, early in January, mid-April. We see August, and then outside that. So during those times, periods of time, that's when people are looking for that. When people are looking for engineering firms, they don't.
Well, probably like structural engineering.
Exactly. So someone
Yep.
looking for a structural engineer near me. Here we have again January, March.
Mhm.
Then we have May, July, August, September. So again, sort of which goes against what you would think for like normal B2B, like office work.
Mhm.
We know that people are out of the office during those times, they're on summer vacation, but people searching for structural engineers, that's actually a summertime thing.
Mhm.
Why that is, I don't know, because I'm not a structural engineer, but I would imagine it probably has to do with budgets and project timelines.
Well, if you think about, what you need structural engineers for, I would personally, if I were, in this space, I would be looking for, what are the trends of structural engineer near me versus contractors near me, because those tend to go hand in hand. So, for example, I needed to I needed to have a structural engineer to look at the back of something on my house before I could have some work done because of the type of landscape that I have. And so typically when you look for one, you're looking for the other. So if I were a contractor, I would want to know when people are looking for structural engineers and vice versa. And that would also sort of tell you, especially again, depending on what part of the country you're in, you know, contractors tend to be busier in New England during the spring, summer, and fall months. Winter's it's tough to do that work versus someplace where it's perpetually summer, like California.
Exactly. And one of the interesting things in this forecast is that the overall macro trend is on the increase, right? If you look for just even simply eyeballing it, you can see that in terms of popularity, this search is increasing in popularity over a long period of time. So if you're a structural engineer or working at a structural engineering firm, this might be a very good thing for you and your business. And that's something that you want to take into account with trends and forecasting as well.
So I think one of the things that we wanted to demonstrate is that depending on the industry, the trend is likely going to be different. So not everyone is going to have the same holiday rush that sort of we've come and know for the retail industry. And
Exactly.
so as we're seeing with structural engineers and architects, there is no winter holiday rush per se. It's more of a spring summer thing. Cheese, depending on the cheese, the type of cheese, it's definitely going to vary between summer and winter. You have American cheese, which is really popular at summer barbecues, hot dogs, hamburgers, all of that good stuff that goes on the grill, versus in December, American cheese isn't as popular because maybe you're not grilling outside as much and you're wanting more of those like festive, like aged cheeses. I'm kind of making that up. I'm lactose intolerant.
um, a really good example is vacation rental. So this
Mhm.
is a very popular term, right? Vacation rental, that season, if people start searching right around spring break, right, right around the April vacation week, just after Easter, and so in 2023, mid to late April is when people are really going to start looking for that, and that peaks. The searches for it peak, sort of end of June. After that's all on the backside, and that is pretty obviously like people trying to find where they're going to go on vacation, right?
Mhm.
But you see, there's a couple of early peaks in January and in February as well. So those may correlate to school vacation weeks. Again,
Mhm.
people looking for accommodations, and again towards the very end, December, we see people who are looking for vacation rentals for the holiday season. But again, a very, very different look, very different industrial look than the other two.
John, what do you think?
Yeah, well, it's just that's the most important thing to keep in mind is that for your industry, you've got to have the data to be able to see these kinds of curves because if you just think it's going to be the classic seasonal thing of it's going to be quiet in December and nothing's going to happen in the summer, you can totally get destroyed. And we see this too because it's we always talk about how we think July, August, September will be dead, but for us, for our customers, that's prime planning time where they're actually free to go into other projects. So what's normally a sleepy time in B2B, and other fronts ends up being really busy for us. So yeah, if you don't have this data, you're just kind of flying blind. And there's a lot of bias with this too. There's people that think when things should be big or not big. And, only the data can really get you on the right track.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. Other things you can forecast, we've not done this here because it requires a bit more lifting, is you can essentially, if you've got any data that goes by time, cashier register receipts, shopping carts online, your Google Analytics data, your email marketing data, your, terrestrial radio ad impression data, as long as there's dates and there's numbers, and it's regular and frequent, you can forecast it. Right? And that's the important thing to remember about these technologies is they are agnostic. You don't just have to use Google Trends. You can use any time series data. And the thing about forecasting is like everything else. The more specific it is, the better. So if it's your Google Analytics data or your Adobe Analytics data, or your HubSpot data, you're going to get a better forecast that is unique to your business than taking an industry-wide forecast.
Exactly. Google Trends is a really great place to start. So that's where we started when we first launched Trust Insights. We didn't have that historical data. So we were reliant upon systems like Google Trends and SEO tools to tell us what people were searching for. But now that we have our own, 5 years basically now worth of that data, our goal is to be using our own data to see how people are searching for us and what kinds of things they're finding us for, and then use that data. And so it's a constant evolution because what we see in our own data might differ from what Google Trends was telling us.
Exactly right. And the thing that we have to keep in mind too is that you may be in a situation where, your data is a hot mess. So don't rule out the search data, even if things are a little bit on the messy side, because you might be able to use public search data if your data is just a disaster. Let's take a look at management consulting. So management consulting, this looks like traditional B2B. Right. So you have your first quarter, lots of interest. You have sort of, second quarter SAG. You have planning. There's your planning season, people, August, September. And then you have, you sort of just fall off the cliff here after Thanksgiving. So that is classic B2B, very, very easy to forecast. So you can see, each industry has its own rhythms.
Well, and I think the so what of that is, if you are just making assumptions about the seasonality based on what traditional, consumerism looks like, you have your holiday season, you have your major, things like Valentine's Day and that kind of thing. That may not be the seasonality that works for your business. And that's why doing this kind of forecast specific to at least your industry is important to understand, those peaks and valleys. And so now I think we're at the point of like, all right, we have all this data. What do we do with it? What can you do with this information?
Right. And that's the question is, it depends on what your user story is, right? That the user story should be telling you. This, for example, is Google Analytics 4. It's on a pretty clear direction as to people's interest in it. But there's some big spikes that are going to be happening in sort of April, and then again in July, which we know for the July one is when Universal Analytics just turns off on stuff. But we also know that April spike is probably going to be a bunch of people going,
We only have
I
one
need-
quarter left to do it.
Exactly. So based on the user story, if we go back to the cheese shop example now, let's actually duplicate this and remove our term and go into our tabular data. Let's say you're the cheese shop owner and it is, let's do the week of Valentine's Day. Cheese and love are in the air.
I mean, who am I to judge?
Exactly. Provolone cheese, followed by Pecorino, followed by Swiss. Those are the cheeses that are going to be most popular that particular week in February. So as you're planning out your Valentine's Day theme in your store and your point of sale displays and all that stuff, those would probably be the, Provolone, Pecorino, and Swiss would be the ones you'd have up front. And you have to decide as a business person, and based on how people use those cheeses, whether you should be doing a discount and a sale or raising prices because demand's going to be there.
Now, how far ahead do you feel is safe for someone to be putting that information out there? So obviously it's going to differ by the type of channel that you're using. But so let's say we know around Valentine's Day that provolone, is going to be the thing. Should I start promoting provolone for Valentine's Day in December? Is that too far ahead? Should I start doing it at least 2 weeks out, or is it doing it just that week, good enough?
Oh, that's where we would look at the data and see what you see in each of these data points is sort of inflection points where things bounce. Generally speaking, you want to promote just after the inflection point. So here for provolone, there's a soft spot in May right there. That's where that search volume kind of ends. Then the following week, the end of May, you go on this upward trend as search volume goes up. So we have to remember the data source too. This is people searching, which means they have intent. Someone is looking for stuff about provolone increasingly until you get to sort of this mid-June thing. So if you were that store owner, as search intent is increasing, that's when you should probably start putting out maybe some digital mailers, maybe some emails, some social posts asking people, hey, what's your favorite provolone cheese recipe? Things like that. And then as you get sort of to that the midpoint of that curve, or even early to midpoint, start running keyword based ads and pay-per-click advertising and on social media where keywords are part of the ad targeting. When you get to this peak here, that may not be when people are going to use the cheese. Now, with cheese, that's probably the case because it's a perishable, whereas something like vacation is going to have more of a time lag. That's when you could say, okay, yeah, maybe we can start to back off our most expensive paid channels, for example, because we know that demand is going to start to gather. But that's where I would say you don't want to look just at that week. You want to get the context for that term or those basket of terms and say, okay, here's what's happening and when I should get started versus when we know everybody's going to be in the knife fight.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. I'm still trying to figure out what's romantic about provolone cheese, but that's where I'm stuck.
Provolone. This is wildly guessing because I am in no way a cheese expert.
I love wild guesses, so let's hear it.
Provolone's a soft cheese that you can melt. You can melt with other cheese. And it makes for great fondues.
Again, lactose intolerant. I wouldn't know that.
You can also use it on pizzas.
Sure.
It's not as good. It's kind of a weird cheese. Smoked provolone is very good. That you can eat by itself.
What would you think about ad spends? Like my gut would be you definitely want to be dumping spending when you hit the inflection point, when search volume is going up. Would you actually turn it off or dial it down once you hit the next inflection point and it starts to fall off? I mean, in theory...
It depends. It depends on how much demand there is and how much competition you've got. One of the advantages of predictive analytics is that like if you're going into a major season, let's go to what would be good? Inbound marketing. right? If you know that you've got a major competitor, say like HubSpot, that's going to be, just flooding places with money, you might want to go just at the bottom of the inflection point, just that early start, because you might be ahead of them, because most people who go by gut and assumption don't have the exact days or weeks. So you could maybe get a market opportunity by going a week ahead of a competitor and get some early share, setting the expectation that because search volume isn't as high, you might not get as much performance, but you might get folks who are starting to think about it, but haven't started searching for it yet. But it's going to be on their mind.
Yeah, that's funny. You totally see the inbound show there in November, right? That's the...
Mm-hmm. Yep. I would say with anything paid, you have to take into account competition, because and also the other thing you have to take into account is inventory. Inventory is an issue too. This past year, if you were doing holiday gift guide advertising, you were paying a fortune in September and October for your ads, not because other people were doing that, but because the inventory is being consumed by politicians running ads. They were just flooding every ad network with as much money as they possibly could, everywhere they could, for all the different elections in the midterms. And that just that just soaks up inventory. And so everybody's advertising gets more expensive when you're in an environment like that. Now, thankfully, for those who are forecasting 2023, you don't have to worry about that. But in 2 more years, in 2024, that until whatever November 7th of that year, there's going to be increasingly less inventory during a presidential election in the United States, and your ad budgets have to be accounted for. And that's, I think, a really important type of predictive analytics, is being able to look at the macro picture and understand, okay, from a macro picture, here's what's happening that's going to affect everything, not just certain keywords, but everything. When we look, for example, at the Federal Reserve Bank's 10-year to 3-month Treasury rate, which we've talked about on the show in the past, that indicator, when it goes below the zero line, means that investors have very, very low confidence in the market, and a recession usually occurs within a quarter. You can see as of this morning when I ran this is fairly significantly red. So investors are very, very bearish right now on the market, and that also means that companies will be spending less. So again, if you're setting ad budgets and stuff, if it hasn't happened already, you will probably get the call saying, yeah, we're cutting our budgets for 2023. And you're like, like we just talked to a client yesterday. We talked to them 3 weeks ago. They're like, oh yeah, we want to do this, this, and this. Talked to them yesterday. Like, oh, our budget's got cut. Like, okay, here's why.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like, the big sort of takeaways, the bullet points are, if you are looking at trying to understand seasonality, make sure that you are comparing yourself to the right industries, the right companies. If you don't have enough of your own data, there are data sources that you can use, such as Google Trends. You can use SEO tools. Those are really great places to start in terms of understanding consumer behavior, your customers' behavior, of how they're searching for you. And then as you are getting more of your own data, start to transition into using that data as a supplement to the organic search data, because it's going to give you more granularity into your specific customer base.
Exactly right. And keep an eye on the macro picture. Keep an eye on the big picture, the things that are going to be influencing stuff in the long term, because we are perpetually and ever increasingly living in a more unpredictable world, and we will be over the next 50 years, right? We saw the last 3 years, hey, someone parked a ship the wrong way in the Suez Canal. International trade stops for 14 days. And pandemics and billionaires buying social networks and all sorts of crazy things have been happening. That unpredictability means that your forecasts have to be taken with a grain of salt, understanding like, these are great tools for making plans, but be ready to just hit the, fling the forecast out the window and say, all right, we got to go with what's happening right now, because this happened and nobody's, this was not on anyone's bingo card.
Well, and I think that lends itself to running a forecast for a year out is okay for planning, but you're better off doing it in smaller periods of time and running it more frequently as things that are now in the past, like the beginning of the show is now in the past. It's already happened. And so that's not something we can predict anymore because it's gone. It's, bye-bye. So running your predictive forecast once a month, once a quarter, depending on how reliant you are on it for planning, is a really good idea. Running it once and saying, great, this is the plan, it's never going to change, not a great idea.
Yeah, think about like the weather. How often do you check the weather forecast, right? Yeah, we'll look at the 10-day forecast for like 2 weeks, but you check the weather every day. Like you don't say, okay, in 2 weeks I'm planning this big vacation because the 10-day forecast looks good, and then you never check the weather again until then. You're like every day, like, oh, hey, look, now it says it's going to rain. Oh, now it says it's going to be tornadoes. Who knows? But all forecasting is like that. There is uncertainty, and in environments of uncertainty, it's a really good idea to check the forecast more than once, more than just once. You would not, I would hope, just pull a weather forecast for a year in advance and say, okay, I'm all set for the year. I know exactly what to wear on every day of 2023. Like, how that's going to go for you?
Is that how you use the weather forecast, John? You look at it once a year and just go say YOLO.
Right. Yeah, exactly. There's no bad weather. It's just bad clothes, right? But how about if I want to get some of these reports? I mean, I don't have time for this. I'm busy running a cheese shop. I don't have time to get these reports. Where do I get this stuff?
If you have the resources to do so, obviously we do them. Clearly, we built these. If you don't have the reports, because they can be reassuringly expensive, there you can still look at historical data, and if you know your industry well, you can make some decent guesses, right? If you're a cheese shop and you look at the last 5 years worth of cheese data and you see trends in it, you can eyeball it. It will have less accuracy, right? It'll be less accurate, but you can say like, yeah, you notice it looks like every May provolone starts to pick up. So I know at some point I should probably be doing something with provolone sooner rather than later. And so in those instances, if you are willing to accept less accuracy, which we just talked about on the podcast this week, that is an acceptable if you cannot afford the full data-driven, machine learning powered forecasts.
But if you can contact John Wall directly. He will take your calls.
John's there.
John's over
standing
there.
by.
I always get it wrong, but yeah, John's. There he is.
Yeah, that's right. Mirror camera getting you there.
It really is. And again, the macro stuff, everyone should be paying attention to that, right? I generally suggest to people that they read news sources like Reuters or AP News, places that don't have a political spin, just like here's the news, because knowing what's going on, like, hey, in the early days of the pandemic, India, a couple of big population centers in India were heavily affected. Those population centers make the precursor ingredients for acetaminophen. So if you know your industry and you know how things work, how supply chains work, when that population center gets shut down, you know that 3 months down the road, there's going to be a Tylenol shortage because of just the way everything is interconnected. So if you have a lot of domain expertise, if you know that this year dairy herds were severely impacted by the drought, you know that cheese prices are going to go up. And if it's an aged cheese, like an aged Parmesan cheese, it's aged for 3 years or whatever, you know that come September, October of 2025, there's going to be a Parmesan cheese shortage, and you're going to need to you should be stocking up your stocks if you have the ability to carry a long-term inventory, like stuff in the deep freezer, and B, expect that you're going to have to charge higher prices, and you may have customers who are impacted. So a good part of the macro of predictive analytics is knowing what's happening right now that's going to have second order effects down the road.
All right, I'm good for the Parmesan cheese shortage of 2025. We're ready.
Put it in your bunker.
Yeah, that's right. In the vault.
All right. Well, I think until next time, That has been your cheese talk.
Thanks, everyone. We will see you next week. Thanks for watching today. Be sure to subscribe to our show wherever you're watching it. For more resources and to learn more, check out the Trust Insights podcast at trustinsights.ai/TI podcast and a weekly email newsletter at trustinsights.ai/newsletter. Got questions about what you saw in today's episode? Join our free Analytics for Marketers Slack group at trustinsights.ai/analytics for marketers. See you next time.